Chapter 1. Unusual heat on the map of Ukraine when Russia suddenly emergency gathering. The war in Ukraine has lasted for more than 3 years, going through countless twists, peaks, and even stages where many observers believed the storm would gradually subside. However, September 1st marked a new turning point when the international media simultaneously reported Russia began to organize an emergency gathering. The phrase emergency gathering sounds like an administrative measure, but in the context of the tense military conflict and the increasing heat on the battlefield, it is like an alarm bell ringing throughout the capitals of the world. The question is, what has prompted Moscow to act so urgently, and what will be the consequences for Ukraine as well as the international community? If you look at the defense map, the hottest areas right now are the Donetsk and Luhansk strips, places that have been considered pressure cookers since 2014. In fact, the supply lines and defense lines here are like gas pipes, and even a small hole can cause a chain reaction explosion. Russia's decision to urgently assemble its forces is not just a consolidation move, but also an admission that they feel real pressure. Ukrainian units, with increasingly clear support from the West, have expanded the scale of their counterattacks and tested unexpected tactics from long-range drone strikes to HIMARS multiple rocket launchers. In this context, the so-called urgent assembly is no different from reinforcing a dam before a big storm season. It is worth noting that the phrase increasing heat is emphasized by both Vietnamese and international press. Here, hot is not only a metaphor for the war, but also reflects the harsh weather conditions currently taking place in Ukraine. A humorous yet detailed example. In many reports from the front line, soldiers on both sides have to cope with prolonged heat, sometimes exceeding 35 degrees Celsius. Imagine wearing body armor, wearing helmets, carrying heavy weapons, and having to fight in the scorching heat. The experience is like walking in the desert but still having to run a marathon. This is the factor that increases the tension of the war, causing both sides to lose strength faster than usual. The underlying cause of the emergency rally can be analyzed from 3 aspects: political, military, and diplomatic. Politically, Russia wants to send a message that it is not passive, that it can turn the situation around even when being pressured by the West with huge military aid packages for Ukraine. This is a reminder to both Europe and the United States that Moscow still has the strength to turn up the heat if it is challenged too much. Militarily, Ukraine's recent counterattacks have forced Russia to mobilize reserve forces and deploy additional air defense systems in major cities such as Belgorod and Rostov. Just looking at the air defense diagram, we will see that the protective circles are much denser, like a multi-layered armor wrapped around Russia's body. Diplomatically, the emergency gathering could also be a move for Moscow to put pressure on future negotiations. If you don't listen, we are ready to take the war to a new level. However, the increasing heat does not stop at Russia. Ukraine is also taking advantage of every opportunity to exhaust its opponents. A typical example is the drone raids deep into Russian territory, including the area near the capital Moscow. On the map, these attack points are like needle pricks on a giant body, small but constantly itchy and uncomfortable, forcing Russia to spend resources to deal with them. Some international analysts have compared this situation to the game of whack-a-mole. Every time Russia stops an attack, Ukraine suddenly appears somewhere else, keeping Moscow in a constant state of tension. Let's look at the humanitarian factor to see the whole picture is even sourer. The urgent gathering means the risk of the war spreading, leading to tens of thousands of civilians having to continue to evacuate. Towns that were already devastated by bombs and shells are now at risk of becoming completely white areas on the map of life. This not only affects immediate life, but also leaves long-term consequences for the social structure of Ukraine. Mass evacuations cause major cities to be overloaded, while the countryside is abandoned and production stagnates. Both sides claim that they are liberating, but in reality, those lands are becoming blank spaces on the map of life. Speaking of this, we cannot ignore the strategic significance that Russia is aiming for. The urgent gathering, according to many military experts, could be a stepping stone for Moscow to launch a major campaign in the fall, the season considered the golden time for attacks because of the dry weather, easy maneuverability of tanks and armor. If this scenario occurs, the defense map of Ukraine could change significantly in just a few weeks. The supply lines from Poland and Romania to Ukraine, already cramped, will be put under increasing pressure. Russia, with its concentrated resources, will try to exploit the gaps in Ukraine's defense system. However, there is also a humorous but poignant opinion. Emergency gatherings are sometimes just a way for leaders to prove that they are still in control of the situation, like a teacher calling the whole class together just to quell rumors that his students are rebelling. If viewed in this way, Russia's move could be a signal that Moscow is concerned about internal instability and wants to demonstrate its cohesion with the image of tens of thousands of soldiers gathered, ready to obey orders. Either way, the war picture is still getting hotter and more complicated. Our first chapter stops at sketching the big picture. Russia with its urgent decision to rally, Ukraine increasing pressure with flexible attacks, and both sides are pushed into a vortex of heat, both figuratively and literally. In the next chapter, we will analyze in depth the consequences of this move on the military, political, diplomatic, and humanitarian fronts. From there, we will see more clearly whether this heat is just an unusual heat wave or a sign of a long-term fire season ahead. Chapter 2: Russia's Emergency Gathering, Map of Power and Strategic Calculations. If in the first chapter we have sketched a hot picture of the Ukrainian battlefield on September 1, then in the second chapter it is important to understand clearly what Russia is doing when it suddenly sends out the emergency gathering signal. Speaking of this, many viewers will imagine a scene in a war movie. When the alarm bell rings, soldiers from all over flock to the headquarters, generals sit around a giant wooden table with a map spread out. But in reality, the so-called emergency gathering is not simply a meeting. It is a combination of politics, military, diplomacy and economics. On the defense map, we can clearly see one thing. The hotspots of the war are not limited to Donetsk or Kharkiv. Russia is under increasing pressure in the Pokrov region, Avdiivka, and especially along the Zaporizhia line, where the defense system is likened to an iron wall. The reason for Russia to convene an emergency conference is to consolidate intelligence, adjust the distribution of troops, and above all, send a message to the West: we have not lost our strength and are even considering new steps. An interesting detail is that when comparing the public military map of the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, with data from the Russian Ministry of Defense, we will see the difference in the way the two sides describe the situation. Ukraine and the West claim that Russia is struggling to fend off a counterattack, while Russia says that it is actively increasing pressure. Between the two conflicting streams of information, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And it is this ambiguity that makes Moscow's emergency meeting so mysterious, like watching a chess match without seeing all of your opponent's pieces. So why urgent? Simply because time is not on Russia's side. The prolonged war has caused economic losses, the population is tired, and Western countries continue to pump modern weapons into Ukraine. The longer it takes, the more the balance of power tilts toward the side with technological support. We saw this in World War II. The Soviet Union initially struggled to hold out, but when the US provided Lend-Lease aid with thousands of Studebaker trucks, millions of tons of food and fuel, the balance was turned. History seems to be repeating itself, except that this time Russia is on the other side, facing a huge aid plan for Ukraine. One hypothesis is that Russia's urgent regrouping is also to prepare for a strategic adjustment, even opening a new front. The defense map shows that Belarus could become a springboard, or the Black Sea would continue to be used for blockade. But would Russia dare to expand the war when it is still struggling to maintain what it has controlled? This is the question that makes international observers have a headache. To put it a little funny, this situation is like a football team leading 1-0 but being continuously pressed by the opponent. The coach can call an emergency meeting to discuss tactics, but the problem is whether he has enough quality reserve players to put on the field or only tired faces. Russia now has to carefully calculate every step because one mistake can turn a fragile advantage into a strategic defeat. In short, Chapter 2 shows that Russia's emergency gathering is not just a spur-of-the-moment action, but a signal to the world that they are preparing for something bigger, and that makes the war in Ukraine more unpredictable than ever. Chapter 3: Raising Heat,
global implications and future scenarios. The most important highlight of September 1 is the phrase rising heat. But the heat here is not only on the battlefield, but also spread to international politics, diplomacy, and people's lives. On the battlefield, the increase in tension is reflected in the pace of fighting, the number of artillery shells fired every day, and as well as the frequency of air strikes. According to reports, in just 1 week, the number of cruise missiles and drones that Russia launched into Ukraine increased by 1.5 times. On the map, the red dots marking explosions near Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv appear more densely. Ukrainians are so used to air raid warnings that many people say we live with sirens like Hanoians live with motorbikes, a comparison that is both humorous and bitter. On the political front, the heat comes from the European Union and the US continuing to discuss a new aid package. Each time Russia responds by showing off another type of weapon or organizing massive military exercises. The world witnesses a hot and cold race. The West increases aid, Russia increases pressure, and as a result, Ukraine becomes the most modern weapons testing ground of the 21st century. Going further, we have to look at the global consequences. Energy prices are rising, food is scarce, supply chains are broken, people as far away as Africa or Southeast Asia are still affected, even though they are thousands of kilometers away. Try to imagine just one port in Odessa is blockaded, millions of tons of grain cannot be exported, causing the price of bread in Egypt to skyrocket. This is the clearest example showing that a war is not just between two countries, but a global event. On the military side, the increasing heat also raises the question, will the war expand? Many experts warn of the risk of the conflict spreading to Moldova or cyber attacks targeting Western infrastructure. If this happens, the world defense map will change dramatically, not unlike the domino effect. One country is dragged in, allies will have to react and the spiral of war can get out of control. But besides the pessimistic scenarios, there is still hope. Some diplomats believe that the current feat can force the two sides to sit down and negotiate. History has shown that when both sides feel exhausted, peace becomes a viable option. We recall the Korean War. After 3 years of fierce fighting, both sides were exhausted and an armistice was signed. Will Ukraine follow this path? The answer remains open. To conclude, it is perhaps worth emphasizing that the phrase Russia urgently gathers, the heat rises is not just a sensational headline, but a reminder that the world we live in is as tightly connected as a spider's web. A disturbance in Eastern Europe can shake the wallets, meals, and even the moods of billions of people around the planet. And in that picture, the most important thing is still how the international community behaves. Will it choose peace or continue to add fuel to the fire? General conclusion for the entire article. Through 3 chapters, we have traveled together from Russia's urgent gathering, analyzing strategic calculations, until the heat of war spread globally. Every detail, from the defense maps to the historical examples, shows that this is not just a regional war, but a global story that affects each of us. As a veteran journalist, I would like to emphasize, understanding the Ukraine war is not just about who won and who lost, but about how the world works today. Because a missile falling in Kharkiv can increase the price of gasoline in Hanoi, and an emergency meeting in Moscow can decide the meals of millions of families in Africa. And if you find this analysis useful, please like, share, and subscribe to the History and War channel. Because only when we learn together, share together, will history and war no longer be dry lines, but become vibrant lessons for the present and the future.